let's talk about She-Hulk Episode 1, A Normal Amount of Rage, which just aired on Disney+. I'm here with Siddhant Adlaka. I'm David Chen. And of course, I want to start by asking, as usual, Siddhant, what'd you think of this episode overall? New show, new character, new actor, and a new format. 30-minute comedy, 30-minute fun lawyer show for the MCU, right? A bunch of new stuff. So it's kind of interesting to reflect on how well it accomplishes these things. I also want to call out Jessica Gao is the showrunner. She's a very talented writer, worked on Rick and Morty before, and I'm a big fan of her. So a lot of great pedigree behind this show, She-Hulk Attorney at Law. What did you think of the first episode?
So I'll say first and foremost, I'm relieved that I didn't hate it because there's always, unfortunately, that possibility going into any Marvel thing. But on top of that, I'll say that I quite enjoyed it. I think so far, it's a pretty light and inoffensive show. Inoffensive unless you're a man baby. We'll get to that later. And I had fun with it. I think it moves pretty smoothly. Obviously I have my reservations about the way it goes about some things, but yeah, I hope it stays this way. Like, I know the focus is going to change going forward, like, who and what the show is about, but it's a breeze so far.
I would agree. I think it's a lot of fun. I think I really enjoy a couple things about it. One is that I've been thinking about, like, why the kind of issues that She-Hulk is dealing with are different than some of the other heroes we've encountered. Obviously, she's a woman, and she talks a lot about that in this episode, and how being a woman has in many ways prepared her to be She-Hulk, and
Mhm.
I think that's obviously interesting. But beyond that, it's that She-Hulk is one of the only times when somebody has had a normal job and then gets superhero powers, right? Because if you think about the other superheroes, many of them they're like gods, or they're spacefaring travelers, or they're billionaires. But very few of them have had normal 9 to 5, or in the case of a corporate lawyer, 9 to 9 jobs, and then had to deal with what it's like to get superpowers, and then people know you have superpowers. Like, it would be probably pretty massively inconvenient to your life to do that, and that's what She-Hulk invites you to imagine is, what if superpowers made my job inconvenient, as opposed to my life already sucked, and now I got superpowers, and I can gonna fight crime and fight evil with them, which is actually a lot of many of the characters in the MCU. Like, that's what their thing has been, is like, something has been going wrong with their life already. Like, take Wanda Vision, Wanda Maximoff and her brother. Like, their lives weren't exactly awesome, and then they had powers. Or Captain America, he was always going to fight crime anyway. He's always going to fight evil anyway. Um, but this is the first time that it's like, hey, normal corporate lawyer or business lawyer, and she's got powers, and that would be pretty rough on you.
Yeah, I think
The other
the
thing I
close.
enjoy about the
Sorry.
show, so go ahead, Siddhant.
I was saying the closest thing we've had is Doctor Strange. He's a surgeon, but when he gets his powers, he becomes, a full time wizard or what have you. He leaves the whole doctor thing behind.
He doesn't. I mean, notably, he does not continue trying to be a surgeon once
Yeah,
he gets his powers, right?
he
Whereas,
he he can't. That's one of the reasons he seeks out, the ancient one in the first place. He's like, fix my hands so I can do doctor stuff again.
right. But once his hands are fixed, he's still not a surgeon at this point, is what I'm saying,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So, whereas it seems like Tatiana Maslany's character here really desires to continue her career as a lawyer, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of that's notable. And then the other thing is, like, yes, people complain about the Joss Whedon-esque cracking wise style of dialogue. But I did really enjoy some of the meta commentary in this episode. I was
Hmm.
reading an interview with Jessica Gao, and she said that actually in some of the initial cuts, like, Jessica Gao loves breaking the fourth wall and, like, the character talking to the audience. She loves that stuff, and she said if it was up to me, there'd be tons of it all over the show, and that doesn't happen. But she said that at one point she had put too much of it in, and they were like, please, like, rein it back, right? And what I really enjoy is some of the fourth wall breaking stuff. Not necessarily her talking to the camera, but some of the meta commentary on MCU shows in general, or on being a superhero, and that kind of stuff. And we'll get into that. So coming away from the first episode, like those were the two things that I really like took away from as notable and enjoyable about She-Hulk Attorney at Law. So
In terms of the
yeah.
dialogue, I found it to be mostly enjoyable, even though it does have a resemblance to the thing you're mentioning. This very snappy, back and forth, snarky um, thing that has become the MCU's go-to ever since Joss Whedon. But I think it works for the most part in this episode because it feels true to the relationship between these two characters as cousins who probably would speak to each other this way.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Well, why don't we dive into the episode, Siddhant? Let's get into it. The opening scene is the character Jen Walters talking to the camera. Because it's very obvious she's kind of practicing. It's meant to feel like she's actually doing the closing argument, but she's practicing it. And then the camera pulls back to reveal that she's actually talking to her colleagues Nikki and Dennis. And she tells the audience, "Hey, by the way, she's a Hulk, but we won't be able to focus on this fun lawyer show, quote unquote, until we know all the details behind it." Which I have to say is probably a fairly accurate assessment of the audience. So, cut to a road trip that she's taking with her cousin Bruce Banner, where she's talking about how this is going to explain how she got her Hulk powers. And there's a bunch of fun little tidbits in this conversation. First of all, apparently Jen uses chopsticks to eat Cheetos in order to avoid kind of the cheese dust getting on your fingers. And I am curious, Siddhant, like, is this an approach that you ever use for your snack needs? Do you use chopsticks to eat Cheetos?
I do not, but I feel like this may be one more of those meta references that you were talking about. I don't know if you clocked it. You familiar with where
Tell
this may have come from? Okay,
tell
because
me about it. Yeah.
I think it was around the time that Moon Knight was starting production. There was a picture of Oscar Isaac behind the
Oh
scenes
yes,
eating Cheetos with chopsticks that went super viral. So I think this may be a reference to that.
that would be amazing if that was the case. Yeah, I remember that Oscar Isaac eating Cheetos with chopsticks. Yeah, and
Hmm.
also there's a quick reference made to cousin Ched,
Hmm.
who may come into the MCU at some point. But
He
yeah,
already has his own wiki page on all the Marvel fan
yes,
websites. So keep an eye out.
but um, I don't use the chopsticks with the Cheetos myself. I think because I find Cheetos to be very delicate, or a lot of like these snacks to be quite delicate. The ones that have the dust on them, Pirates Booty Cheetos, like all those kinds of things, like, and I don't want to crush them. Plus, there's the awkward matter of what to do with the chopsticks when you're not using them. Do you put them on a counter? Do you put them with the like tip facing off, like off of the edge, in order so they don't get cheese dust on other things? You know what I'm saying? Like, I
Well,
haven't basically I have not incorporated chopsticks into my snack eating regimen quite yet, unfortunately.
no, I haven't yet either. But I feel like wouldn't you just put them in the bag?
Yeah, but like I would always be worried about them getting lost. I guess. I guess you could. They kind of
How
stick out,
small are
but
your
yeah.
chopsticks? Or how big is your Cheetos bag?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I'm gonna think. Maybe this warrants more experimentation. Siddhant is kind of the take home from this. So
Look, for those of
I'll
you who
try
are
it.
only listening to this, there is a video element as well. These videos go up on YouTube, and maybe, hey, at some point we might try this on camera.
Indeed. Decodingtv.com/YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. You'll get video versions of our conversations about the shows that we're recapping. Okay. I also like kind of these meta elements where, Bruce Banner is explaining what's going on. He has a device that keeps him human. And she says, "That was the longest answer to what you've been up to that I've ever heard," which is like a very funny touch about like, why would somebody be talking at length about what they're doing unless they had been like giving a really long answer to that question. But I think the last we saw of Bruce Banner, the last two times, number one, he had been he did the snap undoing in Avengers Endgame, and then we saw him in Shang-Chi in the post-credit sequence where his arm was like injured
Hmm.
from the snap undoing.
Yeah,
And so in this scene, he's explaining kind of how he helped to heal his arm, and also like why he's staying human,
yeah.
using this device that's in his hand, right?
Yeah, because again, a lot of
Um,
people did question why he was back in human form in that post-credit scene. If they made such a big to-do about him being, this Hulk Banner hybrid in Endgame.
and he had figured out a way to control both elements of his person by that point. So
Yes, between movies, we never got to see it.
indeed, indeed. Well, we get this. This is kind of serves as like
Yeah,
a little bit of that, basically, right? So then they get interrupted by and then she there was another moment where she says, she gives like Captain America's full history, which I wasn't sure why she's doing that. Maybe that's going to come into play later, but and then I love that Bruce Banner says, "Yes, why are you telling me all the things that I've already said?" It's kind of this commentary on like screenwriting in general. I thought that was very funny. So then a Sakaran ship shows up and causes them to crash. Unclear why the Sakaran ship is there, and like what its whole deal is. My understanding is that the idea that the Sakaran ship is appearing, and I'm going to keep the spoilers light here, is that it is a step in the direction of the World War Hulk story from the comics, and some interesting developments that might build out Hulk's universe in the MCU. But at this point, we don't know what the Sakaran ship's doing, and presumably we'll find out more by the end of the season.
mhm.
This is that stuff we talked about just a little bit a while ago on the podcast, Siddhant, about maybe the show begins with like a very fun standalone premise, and by the end, it's all about Sakaran ships and what's going on there, right? So we'll see. Jen wakes up in a forest, and then she goes to this bar, is harassed by dudes. She gets kind of glammed up by these other women who are in the restroom with her, and then she beats up these dudes before we cut to black, and then she wakes up in Mexico. Before we
she's
get to the
she's
Mexico
about
stuff,
she's about to beat them up, but she gets tackled by her cousin, the Hulk.
mm, mm. So yeah, it happened all very quick at the end
Yeah.
there. But yeah, she transforms, and then she's about to beat them up, and then like yeah, she gets tackled. Any thought before we get to the Mexico stuff, which is the bulk of this episode? Any other thoughts on this opening sequence?
Yeah, I was surprised how quickly and conveniently the blood transfusion stuff happens. Or I'm calling it blood transfusion because that's what it is in the comics, where it's like, oh, they get into a crash, and then his blood seeps into her blood, and she's She-Hulk now. Just because, and this is just a personal thing, I like the element in the comics where she gets hurt and needs a blood transfusion, and then
Mm,
Banner is the only one who can give it to her, despite having his irradiated blood. So then that offers a bit of a sense of like a moral dilemma. Like, do I do this to save this person's life, or what are the consequences of this? But the show doesn't really seem concerned with that. The episode just can, it seems like it wants to get us off to the races as soon as possible. So does it remove an element of that drama in the process? Maybe. But also, maybe it's not that kind of show. Going forward, maybe we'll look back on this as the right decision. But also, again, I'm bringing like comics knowledge into it, so maybe it's not as relevant as I think it is. Um,
I do think it comes off as quite easy. Like, wow, all he needed to do is get a little bit of blood on her, and like now she's She-Hulk. Like that is a life transforming activity. Of
yeah.
course, it's explained later that it's because of their DNA that like responds to gamma radiation. That is why. But
Hmm.
it did
Which
feel like,
I
wow, Bruce, if you could have gotten other people, if you could have like made other family members into Hulks, like that seems like pretty dangerous blood to be carrying around with you. So
Back in the Incredible Hulk, the 2008 movie, we do see something like it, where Tim Blake Nelson's character gets a cut on his head, and a bit of Banner's blood falls into it, and you see his head engorge a little bit. Um, Nothing ever comes of it. It's meant to be like, oh, he's going
mhm.
to become the leader, which is a character from the comics. I'm not calling him like a leader type
Yeah,
of character. Nothing ever comes of that yet. But
mm,
yeah, look,
maybe
it
maybe
happens. It's
soon.
maybe soon. It happens. It's convenient. It's a way to move things forward because as we see in the episode, so much of it is about, yeah, right. She's She-Hulk. We don't need to tell her story the exact same way we told Bruce's story, and so much of the episode is kind of a meta commentary on that. Um, but oh, interesting thing, before Jen Walters gets into that bathroom where that group of women helps her out, she stops by a QR code, and if you scan that QR code, you will get an issue of Savage She-Hulk #1 from 1980, which is her first ever comic appearance, which we may actually talk about as this season goes on.
Awesome. You can't ever slip a QR code by Siddhant, by the way. He's always going to catch it. So nicely done. So Jen wakes up in Mexico. Amazing location. Looks beautiful. Looks very
Mhm.
nice. There's a bunch of cool decor around the house, like the Iron Man helmet, and goes into the basement lab. And it's clear that, like, apparently Bruce and Tony built this, I think, after the events of Civil War, but before the events of Infinity War, is my sense.
No,
Um,
it seems to be after Infinity War, but before Endgame, that five
okay, yeah,
year period.
gotcha. Okay. The because I remember it was a good time and a tough time. I think it was right. So,
Yeah. Oh, and
but
also he
yeah,
was in space between Civil War and Infinity War.
gotcha. I got my wars mixed up, Seventh.
Ah,
I got my fake wars mixed up. I apologize.
well, you're gonna hate
Um,
where Phase 6 goes.
so they talk about, like, how she needs to figure out a way to, like, control her transformation, control her anger. They explain, like, how it was she became Hulk in the first place, and, like, is the blood. And she's like, "Make me one of those machines." And he says, "It's a prototype. I can't do it." So and then he basically needs to, like, train her. They go through kind of like a training montage. Um, and there is this blade room where these blades come out of the wall and, like, approach her. And she's like, "What's the backup plan if I don't transform into Hulk?" But she does, and that's when he realizes she is basically herself when she transforms into Hulk, unlike Bruce, right? When Bruce transformed into Hulk, he was kind of a different alter ego.
Hmm.
She apparently has no alter ego, so that makes her special, unlike Bruce. It took him a decade to get to that point. She's there immediately, which makes her kind of interesting. So any thoughts on, like, this opening part where the extent of her powers and the change to her life is made clear?
Yeah, a couple of things that are just like little connections that may or may not be connections. One, she finds a Led Zeppelin T-shirt lying around, which, did that belong to Tony Stark? He seems to have spent a bit of time there. That was just a fun little thing. Another thing, she received a lethal. That's not a word. Lethal dose. Excuse me, of gamma radiation. I'm just gonna say lethal. She received a lethal dose of gamma radiation,
Mm-hmm.
and she survived because something genetic factors. And I'm wondering, based on something else that happens in another MCU show, no spoilers, is this a reference to genetic mutation? They don't make it quite explicit, but I wonder if those are the genetic factors that Bruce Banner is talking about, because we know, our mutant friends will probably eventually show up in the MCU. um, but those are just two, like, little Easter egg type things I wanted to get out of the way. But
Mm.
as far as the meat of it goes, first of all, what is up with that saw room? Because, like, why would you need something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Unless he built it like that day. But no, it's something that feels right out of not just the vague idea of a Saw movie, but specifically the eighth Saw movie, Jigsaw. They have a wall that is exactly like that in that movie. And, I mean, thank goodness she does Hulk out, because if she didn't, she would be dead. She's right. Bruce Banner is
Yeah.
crazy.
Interesting fact, if you're listening to this or watching this podcast, you're hanging out with probably approximately 80% of the people who have seen that Saw movie,
Yeah.
are right here on this podcast right now. But yes, Siddhant and I are both Saw fans, and yet that
Hmm.
is it's from Jigsaw, right?
Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah, there's, like, the wall of saws, basically.
Hmm.
I think I want to say there's been more than one movie where there's been saws coming out of a wall. Actually, I'm going to put that out there.
There's something similar in the sixth one.
Yes,
By the
exactly.
way, they did just announce that the director of 6 is coming back for 10, but we'll talk about that some other time.
Yes, new Saw movie coming, baby.
Welcome to the Sawcast. Um,
Yes.
but back to She-Hulk attorney at Saw. Um, it's no, I like this segment because it starts to set up the idea that yes, they have a similar origin story, but it is going to be a different kind of story for a variety of reasons. And is it necessary for them to explain all the reasons in this much detail? Maybe. But I did have fun watching it. Um, and I think as the episode goes on, like those discussions become more, I guess, discussion-y and exposition-y, which I have mixed feelings on. But I like the broad strokes of where they're taking it, especially like you said, in this meta sense of like commenting on the story that they are telling and also not telling in a way.
Mm. So then there's basically like a montage where he's kind of training her. He has this big binder that has all his notes, which, you know, if you've ever done uh, personal work on yourself, on your health, then this is a relatively new concept to me, Siddhant. That like um, I started working out recently, and like I have like notes. I need to keep notes basically on like when I'm working out and like what weights I'm lifting, all this stuff like that. And it's like I've never had to like I didn't know it required that much. Anyway, obviously Bruce trying to control his anger and becoming the supernatural human Hulk is a much different thing than me lifting weights, but he clearly kept like very documented things of all the things he went through and like how he approached and things he tried probably, and he didn't expect it to become a syllabus, but it has. Anyway, that was a cool idea, like a cool reference to that idea.
Yeah.
Um, he also talks about dialectical behavioral therapy and how it's important that Jen absorb this kind of therapy. I did a little bit of reading on dialectical behavioral therapy, and I'm going to read to you from a website I found about the topic.
Hmm.
Um, Dialectical behavioral therapy is a modified type of cognitive therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. Its main goals are to teach people how to live in the moment, develop healthy ways to cope with stress, regulate their emotions, and improve their relationship with others. Dialectical behavioral therapy was originally intended to treat borderline personality disorder, but it has been adapted to treat other mental health conditions. Uh, I'm skipping around a little bit, but some important elements of dialectical behavioral therapy: the development of mindfulness. Mindfulness helps you focus on the present or live in the moment. This helps you pay attention to what is happening inside you, your thoughts, your feelings, sensations, and impulses, as well as using your senses to tune into what's happening around you in non judgmental ways. Emotion regulation lets you navigate powerful feelings in a more effective way. The skills you learn will help you identify, name, and change your emotions. And finally, I found this thing of stages of dialectical behavioral therapy. Number one, during the beginning of treatment, the most serious and self destructive behaviors are the first things addressed. Number two, stage two, treatment moves on to address issues that affect a person's quality of life, such as their interpersonal effectiveness, emotional regulation skills, and ability to tolerate distress. Stage three, issues related to self esteem and interpersonal relationships. Stage four, focusing on helping people get the most out of their lives, including finding ways to experience greater happiness, strengthen their relationships, and pursue their life goals. Siddhant, I'm putting this out there. Those stages, that's what this show is going to be. It's going to go through those stages. What do you think? That's the template for the show. I'm putting it out there.
I mean, now that you mention it, yeah, probably. Yeah,
Let's
I
hope
think,
so. Let's hope so.
yeah,
I want that for Jen Walters. I want that for Jen
yeah,
Walters.
because I
Yeah.
think towards the end of this episode, the main, I guess, underlying theme becomes women would rather go to the courtroom than do dialectical behavioral therapy or what have you. Um, but yeah, no, the fact that it comes up in such explicit terms, you might be right about this.
But yeah, it was interesting that like he referenced like dialectical behavioral therapy is referenced so prominently in the episode. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
they don't in MCU shows they don't usually bring up like, hey, let's do some cognitive behavioral therapy. Like they don't usually bring up like real life science terms. So I'm like, I
Yeah.
wonder if it's notable in some way that they did that. So anyway, so there is a montage, and I think it's fun to kind of learn about the practicalities of being Hulk.
Hmm.
Got to reinforce all your furniture. You got to have high ceilings. You got to wear spandex all the time in case you transform into Hulk. Like those are just funny touches. So
Yeah,
it's and that's what's cool about like a TV show is like you can get into all these like in between moments between when these people are destroying villains, right? Like is what it's like to actually live as these people. And I remember watching WandaVision. I think it was WandaVision. You watch her like drive a car. I think in WandaVision, I was like, I don't think I've ever seen one of the characters drive a car before. You know, like it was just a weird kind of moment of daily mundane life
yeah,
that you get to experience during these TV shows.
a car that they weren't either being attacked in or stealing or something.
Right. Exactly. So anyway, I don't think I think it's specifically Wanda. I don't think you'd ever seen her drive a car because she can like fly everywhere. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, I mean, if you could fly, would you ever drive a car, Siddhant, or would you kind of do it just to fit? Like, wouldn't it be so annoying to sit in traffic if you could fly? It'd just be like,
So I'm the thing is I'm scared of heights.
uh
So
huh,
even if I
uh huh.
could fly, I would have mixed feelings about it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
But I'm afraid of heights and I'm afraid of speeds, but I love roller coasters, so I don't really know.
Well, it's because
Um,
you can like simulate, you can come close to those things without ever actually being in danger. So,
yeah, yeah, that's
yeah.
my dialectical behavioral therapy.
So there's again this big training montage where like Bruce teaches her how to do a bunch of stuff and theoretically how to control her emotions and all this stuff, and she obviously rebukes him by saying like I'm way better at controlling my emotions than you. Like the whole tone of this is I am better than you at being Hulk, right? Like she's like I Jen am better than Bruce at being Hulk, and
Mhm.
she probably has a lot of points in her favor there. But do you have any other thoughts on this kind of entire sequence where like they're in Mexico, before they have the kind of falling out? Like any other thoughts on this training stuff?
Love some Hulk Tai Chi. Love that. Love the boulder toss. I think again,
Yes.
it's
Well,
fun.
Bruce throws a boulder into the distance, but like that boulder is probably going to kill someone. Like
Oh, you're right.
you know,
No, because
he
it's
just throws it. Yeah.
he tosses a boulder, a slight bit of the way, and she's like, I can do that. And she throws it even further. I like that, Bruce, one of the heroes, one of the original Avengers, is experiencing these little jealousies that his
Hmm.
cousin, that his girl cousin especially, is, might be a slightly better, more well adjusted Hulk than he is. I think that's an interesting way to go about it because, look, a show like this was always going to, go down the route of making certain gendered commentaries, but I was not expecting some of that to happen via the Hulk himself, which I think is an
Mm.
interesting way to go about it.
Right, because the Hulk, like Bruce Banner, like literally cannot acknowledge in his mind that she is better than, like he seems to have difficulty wrapping his head around the possibility that she doesn't need to go through all the anguish that he went through to become like Hulk, right?
Yeah,
um and
and
he's very resists that possibility.
yeah, and she says it in very explicit terms, like we're different people, like we have different needs, we have different things, so that's why I don't need to do all this. My goals are different. What she's basically saying is my challenges are a character are going to be different, which is I think sort of a preemptive response to the inevitable criticisms you always have for stuff like this, which is like, oh, Mary Sue, how does she know how to do the thing? It's like it's fiction. Just are they telling a good story with it or not? That's the real
Right.
question. And I think
Exactly.
so far, the fact that they managed to incorporate that into the Hulk not being able to deal with it, I think is pretty funny. Um,
Yeah.
but when she has this speech where he talks about, like, you need to be able to regulate your anger and your stress and your emotions. Again, a very charged thing to be saying to a woman, and she has this response that now a lot of people have been discussing online, where I actually have it written down word for word here.
Yeah, she
Here's
says,
the
"quote
thing,
Here's the
Bruce.
thing, Bruce.
Go
I'm
ahead.
great at controlling my anger. I do it all the time. When I'm catcalled in the street, when incompetent men explain my own area of expertise to me, I do it pretty much every day because if I don't, I'll get called emotional or difficult or might just get literally murdered. So I'm an expert at controlling my anger because I do it infinitely more than you. So all of this just feels like projecting a lot of shit onto me." End quote. Right?
Yeah. So I have a lot of mixed feelings about this because on one hand, I think it's again an interesting way to go about differentiating them as characters, and I think there is a truth to it that it almost retroactively reframes the Hulk in ways that I wish we had gotten to see. Because there's a lot of stuff that happens in this episode, like the Bruce Tony stuff. They've carved their initials. They feel like they were actual friends, whereas that hasn't always been the actual case in these movies. So this is sort of retroactively filling in a lot of gaps. Um, and one of those gaps that it seems to be filling in is the reasons that Bruce Banner has had to, go on this 10 or 15-year journey in the first place. Is that because he had all these, unregulated, undealt with anger issues. And the MCU has never really had the opportunity to slow down and really concentrate on them because, The Incredible Hulk back in 2008, I know it sounds like I'm rambling a bit, but I will circle back to my original point. Watch me. Um, the Incredible Hulk back in 2008 is sort of a soft reboot of the 2003 Hulk movie, right? It's not in the same continuity, but it assumes that the audience has a certain familiarity with the Hulk, and so it collapses the origin story of the Hulk into its opening credits montage. And, it starts out with the Hulk in a setting very similar to where he was left at the end of the 2003 movie. So it's kind of a soft reboot. And so going forward, the MCU has never really, really dealt with the origins of the Hulk as an embodiment of rage, right? Which I think is the most interesting story you can tell with the Hulk. And they haven't really done that, especially with that 5-year gap where he finally learns to deal with all this stuff, where he deals with his shit and integrates his two personalities. So now this show is in the position of having to pretend like that story has been told. And so therefore, by making Jen comment on it by saying the reason I am the way I am is because you know I have, like, she is the actual embodiment of his famous line, I'm always angry. Because she has had to, in her daily life, balance things in a way that he hasn't had to. And I know, speaking in broad generalities here, that yeah, the way men are socialized is not always the most healthy when it comes to dealing with anger. And so, in a theoretical sense, it makes perfect sense that this is the way the Hulk story went. That his anger was an emotion that he could not fully control and really, really, really had to work through it. Whereas for her, it was something she has already come up having to deal with, having to disguise. So she would obviously deal with it differently. So I think, again, in theory, I think this is a brilliant approach. I just don't love that it is just basically spoken to the camera rather than dramatized in any
Mm-hmm.
meaningful way.
Mm-hmm.
Because it takes me
Yeah.
back to some of the early episodes of Supergirl when it was still on CBS, which I think does a much better job of telling this exact story about the ways women in the workplace are expected to keep a lid on their emotions lest they be perceived as unruly or what have you. I think, and that whole episode in Supergirl deals with Supergirl dealing with her anger both in the workplace and as a superhero. Whereas over here, yes, thematically it works, but wouldn't it be great if we could see something like this dramatized rather than having it told to us?
Yeah. I think very well put, Siddhant, and I would agree. It's a little bit clunky. It's a great thematic through line for the show,
Mhm.
but the way it's kind of conveyed in this scene is a little bit clunky when she gives that speech to him. So, completely agree. Completely agree with everything you're saying. One thing I also really appreciated about this whole sequence where they're kind of getting into a fight and stuff, and they have a Hulk fight on the beach.
Mhm.
And actually, before I get to this, what I'm about to say, I'll say, speaking of the Incredible Hulk, I do want to call out that will be our main topic for next week on the podcast, decodingtv.com. So we're going to be rewatching the Incredible Hulk and talking about it in our opening segment next week at decodingtv.com. So be sure to watch that, and then we'll talk about it because it will be relevant for reasons that will become clear very soon. So anyway, one of the things I like about this scene is when she talks to him about why she doesn't want to be a superhero. Like, he's trying to convince her, with great power comes great responsibility. And she says, quote, the idea of being a superhero is not appealing to me right now. I don't need to join some secret government contractor squad and have my entire life taken away from me, end quote. Which I thought was a really you realize at that point, at that moment, how hard Bruce Banner's life has probably been. You
Hmm.
know, like and that working for the Avengers is like, you know, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, it's like, oh, it's so cool to be part of the Fantastic Four and the blah blah blah. But like when you see it depicted in like relatively grounded movies, it's like, wow, it's actually really hard, and you lose a lot of your individuality, and you lose, you can't work your corporate law job anymore, and all that stuff just really hit me when she said that. Like, wow, this guy's life really has been hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So okay, before we get to the final sequence, I am curious. There's been a lot of controversy online, Siddhant, about how the show She-Hulk Attorney at Law looks.
Yes.
And in particular, some of the CG looking kind of rough in the early trailers that had come out. Did you have any opinion on how this episode looked? I thought overall pretty good. I didn't really have that many major complaints. The rougher stuff is when there's no practical elements. Like it's like
Hmm.
She-Hulk and regular Hulk fighting on the beach, and I just don't think I think literally almost nothing of what's here is actually practical. I don't think it's filmed on location. It's probably a green screen. The She-Hulk's not real. The Hulk's not real. Like, and so that stuff looked almost like cartoony a little bit. But in general, I thought She-Hulk looks pretty good. I think, when they're interacting with like regular real life objects, it looks pretty good. What did you think of the look of the episode CG wise?
I think the Hulk looks great. I think She Hulk looks really weird. I think she is still very much in the uncanny valley for a couple of reasons. Uh, like, there's been a lot of chatter online recently, and a lot of very well researched articles written about you know um, Marvel Studios' relationship to VFX houses and how these things often come about, and whether it's the rush nature of them or the increased workload that's put on VFX artists. And one of the points that came up along the way was that VFX artists were supposedly, allegedly, told to make She-Hulk look smaller. And whereas the Hulk has all these exaggerated features, she is proportionally very similar to what she is in her human form. And so I'm playing a bit of a guessing game here. It seems to me like so much time was spent like retooling what She-Hulk is supposed to look like that they never quite got it right. Whereas going into this, they already, you know,
They've already done Hulk,
yeah, they
tons of
have,
times. Like Hulk already has a very established
yeah,
look
those,
that they just get, right? Yeah.
the assets, the process, what have you, that's all more or less sorted out. I know it's still, work still goes into it. But if you look at, any given scene where it cuts between the two of them, you look at the way the light is falling on the Hulk's face. He has just more of a texture as a character, whether it's his stubble, whether it's his wrinkles, even the way his hands are textured. And you do see some of that with She-Hulk. Like there was this one bit where you could kind of see a bit of muscle definition on her forearms and a bit of like hair as well, where it is like, okay, she feels like a real person in some moments, but for the most part, when it's just a close up of her, it's just this plain smooth, like not entirely human looking thing that I think I would be able to forgive if Tatiana Maslany was a worse actress, because you
Hmm.
see her in her human form and she's so animated, she's so in tune
Yeah.
with this material. And I think that's one of the reasons that the snarky snappy dialogue works, is because she is so at ease with it. It's obviously very different from her work on Orphan Black, but she seems to be a perfect addition to this universe. But then when you have her in Hulk form, it starts to feel cartoony again. And I know like her dialogue is still delivered the way she delivers it, but the facial expressions become very, Dreamworks face. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes. Dreamworks face, which is like these simplistic, over exaggerated expressions, basically, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that kind of works against the I guess the jokey tone kind of working, because it feels much more exaggerated than when it's just the actress at the wheel. And there are even some shots where where she transforms, but the transformation is entirely off screen, and they seem to have had to cut around a lot of things to have as little of her transformation on screen as possible.
It's tough to know when they're trying to hide CG or when they're just trying to be artful. Like in the first scene, when she starts transforming near the car, you only see her in the car door reflection,
Yeah,
I believe.
yeah.
So yeah, this is a topic of very great consternation and discussion online right now. A Reddit post went viral recently where somebody wrote, quote, I'm frankly sick and tired of working on Marvel shows. Marvel has probably the worst methodology of production and VFX management out there. They can never fix the look for the show before more than half the allocated time for the show is over. The artists working on Marvel shows are definitely not paid equivalent to the amount of work they put in. The charm for working on a Marvel movie is way overrated. I'd rather be happy working on a TV series after decades and decades of this. Sorry, but I had to get it off my chest, end quote. And there's a lot of discussion on Reddit about this, but basically, yeah, it does seem to me very um, plausible to me that they're giving notes on like how the character should look right until the end, and as a result, they never got to work on some of the finer details. If you look at just like the Hulk skin, right, like the Hulk skin is like very detailed, very textured, whereas like she kind of looks more like glossy and
Hmm.
it does she does look a little bit weird compared the She Hulk does look a little bit weird compared to Hulk, and I think it's for the reasons that we've already discussed. But that said, I think it's passable.
Yeah.
Like it's not horrible, but it's not what I would describe as great. Like any other thoughts on this before we finish this episode off?
Yeah, when you're the most successful studio in the world, passable, not terrible is what you want to go for.
Not great, not terrible. To quote Chernobyl. Okay. Well, speaking of things that are not great, not completely terrible, there's the closing scene where she delivers the closing argument, and then Titania, played by Jamila Jamil, crashes through the wall, and then Jen fights her, and that's the end. It's I thought this was like pretty rough,
Yeah.
honestly, Siddhant. This felt like it felt like in the script they were like action scene goes here, and then like no one ever bothered to like write it. Like it was so weird and abridged, and I mean it's probably an homage to kind of some older shows, but it's just like older TV shows, older serials or superhero shows, but like it just felt so kind of out of place compared with how relatively serious the rest of the episode was. What did you think of this final scene?
See, I don't mind the goofiness, but I would say give us the goofy in all its glory. Like there's that
Hmm.
very brief shot of, I don't know how it's pronounced yet, Titania or Titania. I guess we'll see as the show goes on. Jamila Jamil's character, who I'm sure we'll get to know, of her flying across the room in doing kind of a tokusatsu kick. It was funny. It was goofy, but it flies by so quickly. She lands with a thud against the wall so quickly that you don't really have the time to even register what's going on. Um, but I do like the closing moments of the show where they start playing Eve's "Who's That Girl," and she being Jen Walters kind of stands in her like her half toned suit and tries to give her closing arguments again. Yeah, I thought it was fine. Everything preceding it was odd. I wish it was either much more serious or much more goofy rather than this choppy in between nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
But like I said, I didn't dislike it entirely, so I'd like to see where this goes
You talking about
next.
my quote? I didn't dislike it entirely. Is another quote you can put on that Marvel poster. Um, She-Hulk Attorney at Law. I didn't dislike it entirely. All right. Well, Siddhanth, any closing thoughts? I thought the first episode was fun, and I think it's like delivering on its promise of being a fun lawyer show so far. My sense, from reading reviews and stuff, is that like this show has not yet established the status quo of
Hmm.
what the rest of the series is going to be, what all nine, like most of the 9 episodes are going to be. But in terms of giving this backstory, it's cool that they got Mark Ruffalo in the show, um, and Tatiana Maslany is obviously very talented and brings a lot to this role. Fun episode. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, if it ends up being a fun, goofy villain of the week type thing, with isolated adventures, contained adventures, I wouldn't mind that. again, I don't know what the show is about yet. I haven't seen the second episode. I've only seen like the trailers they released beforehand. I've not seen any, next week on type stuff. I'm just glad that so far the stakes aren't about, saving the world or saving a city even. Um, and I don't know how much more we're going to see of the Hulk, but I like the dynamic that they have so far. You may have already seen online people like shipping Hulk and She Hulk. Sure, why not? It happens for everything out there. I'm not, much of a shipper myself, especially when it comes to like characters who might be like related. But it's interesting to see this happening just because I get why, because these two characters are maybe like the only man and woman throughout the entire MCU who feel like they have anything resembling a realistic dynamic. Um, so sure, go nuts, everyone. So I like what they've got going on,
Who
and
cares if they're cousins? Who cares
it's
if it's
fiction.
technically illegal?
It's fiction. I don't. It's you want to ship two big green people together. That's fine by me. But yeah, I like that dynamic. I've said I like that dynamic a lot. Um, the show works ish so far. Put that on the poster.
All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap us up here for today on Decoding TV. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week. We're going to be covering The Incredible Hulk, as well as She Hulk Attorney at Law Episode 2 here on the podcast. So if you want to watch along with us, that'd be great. You can find this show on all your favorite podcast players. You can support this show at decodingtv.com. Find us on YouTube at decodingtv.com/YouTube. And that's it. He is Siddhant Laka. I am David Chen. We'll see you next week.